All right, good morning, everyone. Just going to adjust this camera a little bit and
technical difficulties.
Unforeseen. This is live TV, right?
You work on that. This is meteorologist Eric Garlick. I'm Chief Meteorologist Al Conklin. Welcome to the First Alert here, our in-depth coverage of topics that either you can suggest or we dig into, and we are deciding this morning to dig into the tropics a little bit more. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about, hey, the active hurricane season we thought we would get, and certainly, Eric, it has started off that way with now 3 named storms, and of course the biggie being last week, Beryl. Really unusual storm for lots of reasons because of where it started out near the Cape Verde Islands, which usually you don't get that until you get into August. But there we were late June into early July, and we had ourselves a Cape Verde storm. And it is still wreaking havoc up in Canada. Thankfully, it's finally moving out of the United States.
Yeah, think of how many people this affected from, I mean, even the ships out in the Atlantic to the, Windward Islands to the
Mexico,
Yucatan Peninsula to
Texas
and all the way across. So a lot of people affected by what's going on with Beryl, and unusual to have a storm that early. So we're going to kind of jump into this and talk about a few things, all tropic related, and really how potentially some tropical mischief is going to impact us as we head through the next 48 hours, really.
Yeah. Here's the situation. We're very sure that really over the next 2 weeks, the tropics, by and large, when you look at the entirety of the Atlantic basin, will be quiet, and that's good news. There is one little fly in the ointment, though, that if something is going to happen, it's probably going to be in the next 24 to 36 hours or so, and it's not too far from the Carolina coast. So with the big picture, quiet. But in the short term, the very short term, we're watching something that's off of Florida right now, and that wants to come northward.
And we were really just talking about some rain and some thunderstorms in eastern Carolinas already.
A wave has just come
Yep.
in, so let's get into
jump
it.
into
We'll show
it,
you what's going on. All right,
So,
yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Hurricane season, we've already checked off 3. A lot of people probably don't remember Chris. It was very short-lived.
Yep.
Became Tropical Storm Chris, and then made landfall in Mexico and didn't impact the U.S. At all. And then, of course, we had Beryl and Alberto, but Beryl, the big one that we've been tracking the last, I feel like we've been tracking it for 2 weeks.
It has been. It has been. Going back to late June, and now here we are into the second week of July, and it is still impacting, as I said, upstate New York and New England, and now into Canada. It's finally, today will be the last day that we probably mention anything about Beryl, but we're going to talk a little bit about sea surface temperatures. Let's take this graphic full here, because I think what's important about this, we'll go back to that, there you go, is that we're seeing very, very warm water. That Gulf Stream water is in the upper 80s right now. And notice again to the east and south of us, this is the zone that we have to watch. South of the Dominican Republic, all the way to the coast of Venezuela, and then eastward all the way to the west coast of Africa. That's the zone where these things want to form. And what we're seeing is record warm water right now. Now, there hasn't been too much of a trigger for a lot of storms. In fact, it's been just the opposite. We've had a lot of dust from coming off of the Sahara, which is basically kind of shuts down or at least inhibits a lot of the production. But you're primed right there.
Yeah, and one of the things that really jumps out at me looking at the current water temperatures, if you look back toward the Yucatan Peninsula and just south of Jamaica and over toward the Windward Islands, this is where Beryl tracked. Typically when you have a major hurricane, Category 4, Category 5 move through the area, it disturbs the water and churns it up and brings some cooler temperatures to the surface.
Yeah, it's called upwelling, and you oftentimes will see this, especially close to the coast. But here, again, what you've got is is such a wide, vast body of water here, and of course, the sun is the strongest that it's going to be all season. This time of the year, late June, early July. But you're right, we didn't really see any signature of cooling. If we did, it was very brief. Now, granted, Beryl was really a kind of a small, compact storm, powerful storm, at one point Category 5, but it was a small storm, and so it didn't have perhaps as big an impact. But one thing was for sure is whatever cooling there might have been was very brief, and that is long gone now. And so these sea surface temperatures are primed and ready to go. But again, right now we're not seeing big triggers, so we'll give it some time. But here's where Beryl is now. Essentially just to the west of Buffalo and Toronto, and brought a whole lot of damage in the form of tornadoes and thunderstorms and floods to the northeast yesterday. But look at the track of this thing.
It goes all the way back through Little Rock into Houston, Galveston, through the Yucatan, through Grenada, all the way back toward, really when it developed off the coast of Africa and tracked all the way across. And Al, you mentioned the Saharan dust. This storm formed very far south and very far east for this time of year. But to the north of it, we had that Saharan dust that prevented any of those waves that were coming off the coast from developing in that area. We had this wave come just far enough south to avoid the Saharan dust, and it developed in a big way as it moved across the Lesser Antilles and the Windward Islands and all the way up toward Jamaica.
Yeah, and this is highly, highly unusual to have a storm form in this neighborhood at this time of the year. In fact, a lot of records were shattered with Beryl, as the strongest storm so early in the season, strongest storm so far east at this point in the season. So it really just shattered a lot of records. Typically, that's a pattern that you would see in August and September at peak time, but this is way early in the season, and it happened. And now it just tells us that we got to be on the lookout, because the peak of the season is still a long way away. And if this could happen in June and July, it can definitely happen in August and September. And we've already seen our first Cat 5. We already had one major hurricane. Now, granted, it was not a major when it struck Houston. It was a strong level 1, but it was a Category 1. But it was at one point a Category 5. So it just tells us the environment is going to be very much conducive to these strong, strong waves of low pressure coming our way. We were on a conference call yesterday, Eric, with Phil Klotzbaugh, who is a doctor of meteorology, and his specialty is in tropical meteorology. And in his essence, he really does long-range forecasting, seasonal forecasting. And we had an opportunity to do some questions and answers with him. And he's saying, look, we still got to wait a little bit. We've come out of this, El Nino pattern, but we're not quite where we need to be for everything to go full blast. And that's one of the things that we're probably going to see in time, is that things will really come together. You mentioned the Saharan dust. We had wind shear. We had all these factors, and we still had a Category 5 hurricane that formed.
Yeah, very rare, again, to see it that strong, where it developed this time of year. And one of the things that Dr. Klotzbaugh was talking about yesterday was we really don't see things get going until August. Really, August 20th literally is when they ring the bell for hurricane season to pick up.
He mentioned that yesterday because his predecessor, Dr. William Gray, who really was the grandfather of all of these seasonal forecasts. There are now 26 entities that do seasonal hurricane forecasts, but he was the one that started this back in 1985, and he would ring the bell on August 20th of every year. And you say, well, what's the significance of that? Climatologically speaking, that's when hurricane season really ramps up, and that's when you get into the active zone. Can you get some in May? Sure, even before the season starts. That happens once in a while, about every 3 or 4 years. June and July, combined, I think it's about 14% of all tropical storms form before August 1st. It's not many. Once you get into August, and especially the back end of August, it really ramps up. Remember, there's a lag time. The oceans are warming up, and while we're going back to school and the nights are getting longer and we're cooling off a little bit at night, the oceans are still ramping up then, and that's why you see this go all the way into October.
Those temperatures are in the mid-80s right now. They're only going to warm up. They're going to go up, and it's going to provide more fuel, and that's why late August and September is when we see hurricane season ramping up. We see things warmer.
So let's talk a little bit about this swirl of low pressure that's off of the coast of Florida right now. All right, so the National Hurricane Center gives us about a 10% chance of formation. Doesn't mean there can't be heavy rain, can't be wind along the coast. There will be, we think, over the next 24 hours. It's already happening down there now. But will this develop into something? Probably not, but we'll see. It's certainly going to be a low, but does it have time to take on a lot of tropical characteristics? Probably not. But there's certainly going to be some heavy rain, Eric.
Yeah, and looking in the future, second half of July, really to 20-40% chance of development. It's in the Pacific.
Yeah.
And another thing that I kind of learned yesterday was you don't typically see an active Atlantic and Pacific at the same time.
Doesn't happen.
One's active, the other one's quiet, and so on and so forth.
And in fact, there's only been one storm out in the Pacific, which is highly unusual. Usually early in the season, that's where things are really taking place. But again, for all the reasons that the Atlantic suddenly, we're already at, on our third storm, named storm here, and we're barely 5 weeks into the hurricane season, it's been just the opposite out into the Pacific. And so this is always, I love this graphic. I think here's where we are. That blue line is where we are right now, right? It's the 11th of July. So we're about a third of the way through July. And again, you see where we bounce around there, May, June, really low percentage. Where do these storms want to come? Where's the peak of the season? It's right around September 10th, 11th. Climatologically speaking, over the last 30 years, and really you can go out the last 100 years, this is when the storms happen. So we're just now starting to ramp up over the next probably month. Once we get into that right around the middle part of August, kids going back to school, watch out. That's when things really ramp up.
Yeah, and ramp up in a big way. We see more of the major hurricanes come that time of year. And one of the reasons why we're doing the tropical update today is Dr. Klotzbach's team at Colorado State University issuing an update to their 2024 hurricane forecast. So
this came out 2 days ago.
Yep. Yeah. The old one is in the blue. The new one is in orange. So
and it includes the 3 named storms that have already occurred.
Yep.
So average over the last 30 years, 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 majors. Now keep in mind that these seasonal forecasts talk nothing about where they may go. This is just looking at the entirety of the Atlantic basin, the Caribbean, the Gulf, and the Atlantic. And so we are looking at probably 25 named storms total. We've already had 3. And 12 hurricanes and 6 majors. And I saw something online yesterday that said the risk for a major hurricane to strike the United States now is about 60% this year. So that's elevated. We're seeing everything come together here. The sea surface temperatures, the wind shear factors, the dust is going to abate, which has been kind of putting a lid on things. All this is going to come together. And as we get into the peak of the season, that's why we're concerned. And again, what we don't know, are the next storms going to Galveston? Are they going to, Palm Beach? Are they going to Cherry Grove, South Carolina? Kitty Hawk, North Carolina? We don't know that yet. Stands the reason, though, that the Carolina coast is probably going to be a prime spot by what we're seeing in some of the data that we saw from yesterday. And also Texas appears to be an area to really monitor. We've seen now a couple that have tried to go that direction.
Yep, and of course we'll keep you updated on all of that. But let's talk about this little system off the coast right now, as it has that 10% chance of development. But impacts really already starting to be felt across the eastern Carolinas from that system, kind of hurling a little bit of moisture and humidity back into the area along the east coast. Here's 10 o'clock tonight. You can see some of those, outer bands, I guess you could call them, as they kind of move off to the north. But you can see that center of circulation right through the Jacksonville area and then up toward Charleston. And the rain becomes more widespread as we head through Friday afternoon into Friday evening, and just kind of continues to work into the Piedmont as we head into Friday night and then as we go through the day on Saturday. And I have this looped so we can continue to talk about it and go over it.
Yeah, I think also, Eric, what I'm seeing already in eastern North Carolina is that first wave of thunderstorms are already coming through now. So the models may be having a hard time. Now keep, working with, the timing of this, but I will say this, the front that came through last night is why we have lower humidity out there right now. It feels great in the WBTV viewing area. That front has stalled, though, just to the east of us, and that's the focus for where these showers and storms are already starting to develop. If you were to drive from Charlotte to Wilmington, you'd get about halfway there. You get to Laurinburg, and suddenly the humidity level jumps right back up. That front has run out of gas. That's the conveyor belt for this developing storm system, and again, that's why we are always thinking that the heaviest and the steadiest of the rain Friday with this would be east of us. But there is obviously some potential, especially from 77 eastward, that some of this is going to get thrown back our way. These models have been sort of trending westward a little bit. Whether it's a tropical system or not, it just gives you an idea that, okay, something's coming up, coastal low, here we go.
And depending on exactly where it tracks, we talk about these tropical systems, 50 to 100 mile difference in the track. It will make a huge difference in the impacts that you see where you are.
Those types of questions is what gives me gray hair. Right, because and I use this analogy a lot. If you talk to an engineer that's building a building, right, And if he's off by 1 inch at the bottom, or she, what do you think the disparity is at the top of a 100-story building, right? So when we see a hurricane or a tropical storm here, and we see this wide envelope of where it's going to go, well, if the whole thing is off here a little bit, stands the reason wherever it curves is going to be off as well. And
not even the location, the data that we get. It's all inputted into a model, a numerical weather prediction system. So the minute differences in humidity and temperature, anything that doesn't have good initial data is going to have errors in the forecast the further that we get.
Right. What do we used to say? Garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
Right. So you got to make sure you have good, solid data, and that's why we always tip our hat to the hurricane hunters and the NOAA research folks that go out there and they put the SONs out. In other words, they're measuring all kinds of data for us. Because that all gets incorporated into these models, and that's what helps us, to at least fine-tune these forecasts. There's so much. They're not great. They're not perfect by any means, but the forecasts are so much better than they were even 10 years ago now. And data, climatology proves that.
Yep.
We can go back and look at the data. How good, were the forecasts? So what we still struggle with a little bit is intensity, more so than track. The intensity. Things can happen. It goes over the Gulf Stream. It goes from a 2 to a 4 in 3 hours. Rapid intensification is still a big issue.
Yep. So we'll be monitoring the tropics all season long. We got a long way to go yet.
Got a long way to go.
Stay tuned. We'll be providing these updates when we get new information, little tidbits and stuff that we can dive a little bit deeper into. We'll share it with you on the First Alert.
That's the First Alert for this go round. We'll focus on the tropics today. And we'll, again, keep an eye on this. We'll have updates on our forecast. I'll have one at noon on WBTV. And then, of course, later today, Lisa Villegas. So you all have a great afternoon and enjoy the sunshine and the lower humidity.
Take care.